Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is a speculative fiction author and former Air Force engineer. The disclosure paradox takes real life experiences and puts them into fiction. Please welcome Paul Vecchiet to Epic Realms. How are you doing?
Hello, hello, Nick. How are you?
Uh,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I was reached out to have you on, and I was so excited because I was reading your stuff and looking at like your entire life, and it's so cool, all of the things you've experienced and done, and now your books, you got other books coming out as well, so I'm very excited for that. A lot of what you write about and has talked about and experience has to do with like UFO UAP culture. What were some of your first experiences? Was it later when you were an adult, or did you have some of that when you were younger, when you were a kid?
Well, the book is could be an autobiography, and what I do is through the book I explain why I wrote the book. Okay,
Okay.
um, so there's a there are certain things that have to happen in sequence for me to get to the point. It's not just a certain experience that would make me write the book.
Right.
The first thing is that I was brought up in a very heavily Catholic family, went to Catholic school, and there I had a skeptic, um, view about religion and
Right.
Catholicism. I was one of the few kids that had that, and to replace that, I replaced it with interest in science fiction and books and movies, but also the space program, the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo mission,
Yeah.
all of those, were brought into our living room, and I was enthralled by that. So um, the one aspect that got me interested and kind of validated that there was more information out there that needed to be delved into is when I was in high school that I was listening to a rock station and falling asleep, and then waking up to the voice of Eric von Däniken explaining how the Bible had passages in there that were really misinterpreted um, events that were UFO or ET related, and specifically the Book of Ezekiel.
Okay.
The next the next day, I went to high school and looked up the Bible, and word for word, it was exactly the way Eric explained it, and that made me, it validated my skepticism about religion, first thing,
Right.
but it also added a little more curiosity, and you know, I just kept that in the back of my mind. But what really happened, the first, I guess, major incident was when I was in the Air Force, and I was a an officer, construction manager at Aeronautical Systems Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And our client agency was Foreign Technology Division. Now, Foreign Technology Division, for those of you that don't know, is or was the organization that was responsible for evaluating weapon systems from other countries, looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities that we would have. They would take that information, and then across the base was our research and development offices. They would take that information, pass it over to them, and there they would develop the concepts for future weapon systems. So my project was on the second floor of this building that was a two-story converted warehouse. Once you got there, you were surrounded by motion detectors on the lawns. Once you got in, even if you had a top secret clearance, you were escorted. And as you gained access, I noticed that there were no numbers on the doors, no names on the doors. There was no directory.
Right.
All the painting was white. And the escort explained to me that whoever was in one office didn't know what was going on in the other office.
Oh wow.
Mine was on the second floor. and the second floor was completely gutted. Now we're talking about a building that is 250 by 250 feet square,
Okay.
so it's large.
Yeah, it's big.
And at that time, that was the late 80s, and in the late 80s, computer systems were very large. So we were um, gutting the building for the contractor to install a new computer system. Now, one of the tasks that I have as a construction manager was to make sure that there was no way that a contractor could have claims for changes or for different site conditions. So what I had to look at was a roll of drawings that were labeled as-builts. And as-builts are drawings that show the condition of the facility prior to construction. So as I'm going through the drawings, I noticed that there is a floor plan and it's labeled basement. And I'm thinking,
Interesting.
wait a minute, this is a warehouse, former warehouse. Warehouses are never designed with basements. It's not economical. If they
Right.
want
Doesn't
more
make
space,
sense.
they just add more space, right? So I checked the outline, matched it with the floor plan of, the building, and it matched. So obviously it was authentic. That floor plan was actually for a basement for the building that I was in. How to get there, I had no idea how you would get
Right.
there. I'm thumbing through the drawing some more, and I notice a detailed floor plan for a 70 by 90 cryogenic chamber. And I'm thinking, okay, foreign technology division, cryogenic chamber,
Right.
there's something going on here.
Yeah.
So, so I realized that it was very sensitive information that I didn't have a need to know. And I made sure that the escort um, was not aware that I saw what I saw.
Right.
So I rolled the drawings back up exactly the way they were, where they were. And I kept that secret for 5 years after I left the service. Now, fast forward to 2009, and I'm watching Ancient Aliens at home. And sure enough, it's Eric Von Däniken again. He's talking about Ezekiel again.
Right.
And all of a sudden, something in my mind, brought back that memory of when I was in high school. And at the same time, that memory about Wright Patterson. And I put the two together. And that's when I started to kind of have an obsession about finding more things out about the world we live in and the secrets that are being kept from us.
Yeah. If you were to go back and like talk to yourself as a kid, what would you as a kid have said to all that? Not knowing that
Um,
he was talking to you, not knowing that you were talking to yourself. What do you think you as a kid would have said? Maybe what would your parents have said?
what would my parents have said to me
Like if you
when
went
I was
back
a
now
kid?
and told them, "Hey, this is some stuff that
Oh,
I've seen." Like would they be like, "Oh no, that's would they have brushed it off or would they have believed you?"
um, I think the frame of mind back then was strictly God and Jesus
Hmm.
and faith,
Yeah.
and anything that would have upset that paradigm would have upset them.
Okay.
So, um, that kind of mentality, the UFO thing, it didn't sit with them until things started to show up in mass media,
Right.
and much later in life than when I was a kid.
Yeah. You mentioned some of your time in high school. You eventually went to get a bachelor's degree in architecture, correct?
Correct.
What
Yeah.
was the decision behind that going into that?
Again, oh well, that was influenced by both my father and my grandfather. My father was in construction. He was a terrazzo worker, and I kind of marveled at the craft that he had. He
Yeah.
was a craftsman, working with stone and concrete and marble. And my grandfather was a cabinet designer. woodworker. And for my 14th birthday, he bought me a drafting set because I was doing well in drafting in high school,
Okay.
and I told him that I liked it. And then he told me, "Why would you want to be a draftsman? Think about being an architect." And I never even heard that word before.
Right.
But I had a friend in high school that was going to architecture school. I talked to him, and he told me about it, and I was accepted quickly with him, and we both went to college together. And to this day, we're best friends. So um, it was a lot of influences. What I state in my book is that other people have a greater influence on your life than you have on yourself, and that was manifested there.
Yeah, for sure. How did you go from that you're in school and then, eventually you become in the Air Force? Did you end up enrolling or was it
Yeah,
like a hired because of your schooling kind of there's a strange little transition that I'm guessing is there.
very pragmatic decision. In my fifth year group, and we went from 100 first year to 25. When you graduate,
Right.
that's the um, you know that's the attrition. That's a forced attrition. Um, Three guys in the class with me decided to join the military because there are two things happening. One, when you got out as a graduate, there was a 27% unemployment rate at that time among just architects, not just graduates. So we're talking people that have had degrees for a long time and were
Right.
looking for work. So we couldn't compete with that.
Right.
And the other thing was that the government was taking advantage of that, and they were offering $12,000 signing bonuses for architects to join the military. So one guy went into the Navy, one guy went right before me to the Air Force, and I decided, okay, I'm going to try it, and that's what I did.
Okay. Did you have to go through all the regular training that everybody goes through or was it something different because of the
No,
schooling or
absolutely. So you have to obviously pass an aptitude test, and I did so well in math and geometry and all that stuff. They wanted me to make me a navigator. I said, no, I went to school as being an architect. If you got architecture, I'm going to do architecture or construction. So they said, well, are you sure you could be a real good navigator? And I said, no, that's fine. So you pass the test, and then you go to what's called it's a 90-day um, course. It's a accelerated course. Um, what all the ROTC people do. It's kind of accelerated in 90 days. They call them 90-day wonders, or
okay.
myself. And it's at Lackland Air Force Base, just like where basic training is. And you go through everything, learning about the military, the history, uh, learning the uniform, the customs, writing. They teach you how to write, and they teach you how to speak in front of people and present. And then, of course, you go through a lot of obstacle courses. They teach you how to shoot. So yeah, it's the whole thing.
The whole
And you
shebang.
turn out when you graduate, you're a second lieutenant.
Nice. So when you go through all that, were you like looking long term, like, okay, I'm going through all this stuff, but I'm still going to be an architect eventually? This is just more school, or
Oh yeah,
were there times where you
yeah.
doubted that?
What happens is when you're in that school, officer training school, everyone has a discipline. There were lawyers there, there were medics there were pilots, of course. And right before you graduate, you get a letter from Manning and Manpower and Control. And what they do is they essentially tell you where you're going to be going when you graduate. And for the construction people and civil engineers and architects and electrical engineers, it's called Palace Blueprint. So Palace Blueprint sent me a letter saying that my first station will be at McCord, and I will be a junior architect.
What does it mean? Because I hear civil engineer officer, and I'm like, okay, that can be a number of different things in my civilian mind, right? So explain to our audience exactly what that job entails as a civil engineer officer, because we've already talked about, like, okay, architecture, so now we've kind of got this idea of the engineer, you know, part of it
Hmm.
and figuring out what that means. But what does it entail? What does the job actually do?
When you're a civil engineering officer, um, first of all, you're assigned to a civil engineering squadron, all right? And the squadron has architects, civil engineers, planners, um, electrical engineers, construction managers, mechanical engineers, and those are like the officers. But then they also have the woodworkers, the plumbers, the electricians,
Okay.
um, the guys that handle the arresting barriers, exterior electric generators, uh, and structures, and even firemen. And those are the enlisted people. Okay. When you're an officer in civil engineering, um, it's generally that you learn about how buildings or projects are managed, are started, programmed, and you don't necessarily have to be an architect, but there are special, um, I guess, jobs where an architect is required. So I had a number of jobs on my first station. I was a construction manager, a programmer, which is just looking at projects and figuring out how big they should be, how many people are going to go in there. A planner, which is looking at how the base works, a a designer, and and then you've got the war fighting mission, and everyone learns that. And it doesn't matter if you're an architect or an electrical engineer or whatever. They have Everyone needs to know how to react when we go to war, and that involves base recovery after attack, um, base um, what's it called? Uh, Bomb damage assessment, which is looking at what happened, and then looking at ways to repair. Expedient engineering, which is setting up tents and properly and safely, including where the water comes from, where the power goes to,
Yeah.
and then there's a thing called rapid runway repair, which is the big thing for the Air Force. So if our runway gets damaged, then there is a set plan with equipment and a number of people for these teams that go out and look at the craters from the bombs, measure them, and then figure out the materials that we need, the vehicles that we need, how long it would take to do it. And as officers, we learn that part, and then we can brief our commanders of how fast we can get the planes up after repair.
That's a lot of stuff. And I
Yeah,
can
it was a lot of stuff.
and I can only imagine, like, people, they think of places like Roswell or any kind of secret, Area 50. Somebody had to build that, right? People had to put that there and build it. So I
Sure.
can only imagine, with some of the things you've already kind of talked about a little bit, that you've seen a lot of things that's like, and worked on a lot of things that maybe people don't realize. How much of that are you allowed to talk about now that you weren't then?
So there's this thing that I've realized, and it's evident from the way things are. The government doesn't deny anymore.
Right.
They just don't acknowledge the information at all. Especially now in the day of the internet,
Right.
the more information that is out there, regardless of being true or false, the better it is for the government to conceal the truth, because it's like X-Files. X-Files has some truth that they sprinkle in with all of their fantasy,
Right.
and the common viewer will recognize all of that as fantasy. But people that know will understand what is truth and what is not, but there's only a few of us.
Yeah.
And so it's the same way with the internet. The more information is out there, the better. So yeah, I could talk about things, and it doesn't matter, especially because the information I have doesn't have an impact on our national security. And that's what they're concerned about, is national security.
Right.
And besides, my point of view about what's going on aligns exactly with what the government is doing, because I agree with the government that we are not ready for disclosure.
Right. In 2009, you had a
Mhm.
transformative experience. Could you tell us a bit about that and how that ties in to some of these other experiences?
Well, as I mentioned, that was the one where I kind of woke up after seeing Ancient Aliens,
Oh, okay.
and it just I filed that experience about seeing the cryogenic chamber, the proof about this cryogenic chamber in the back of my mind. Some people would be pressured, some people would have stress about having that information. It's like it was just put in the back of my mind, and it came out when it needed to come out. And that's what started me on the path of right away going into social media and uh, learning or trying to learn about certain information that's being kept from us about, for example, energy, free energy.
Yeah.
Some people call it free energy, or at least the inventions that were made that would help reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, for example, um, and the information about what happened to some of those inventors, what happened to some of their families, how many inventions the patents were taken from them in the name of government's um, national security. So I learned about that. I learned about how uh, big business is actually funding universities as their own R&D programs,
Right.
and universities will only be working on things to benefit big business in some cases. I learned about, you know, the pharmaceutical conspiracies, and I learned a little bit about what were chemtrails
Yeah.
and research about that. That all there was a common thing about that when I met people that would tell me those things, they also would tell me about their information about extraterrestrials, that they have had contact, that some were abducted, some have had um, implants made.
Right.
And I reasoned that a lot of those people, they were opening up to me, but they refused to kind of open up to other people. So what I did is I set up a support group in Facebook called Spirits and Healing. And we had as many as 300 people in there, and they were all people that want to share experiences about their, extraterrestrials contact, any information that they have, sightings, and they would compare, and I got that information, and I would document that information, and I started a blog called The Red Pill, and it was that information and meeting those people that were the foundation for this first book.
Okay.
So that's how things started. Now, um, once I decided to get back into the government, I stopped the Red Pill blog because it had a lot of sensitive information,
Yeah.
and I also left that group because I didn't want them to see my association with those people.
Right.
I wanted to get the job. So, but I still kept the information. Uh, I I kept hard copies, or the the data in files, and I used that to compile um, what I had in my first book, including all of the people that I made into characters in the book, because the book has characters that are based on real people, and those people are the people I'm talking about. Now, the one thing that I also learned about those people that were um, they were, experiencers, is that they would say that they got psychic um, abilities after their contact or after their abductions. And so I would, talk to them, and I made, you know, relationships with some, and some strong relationships. And I also learned that another common thing was meditation.
Yeah.
So um, one of the women turned out to be like my mentor, because she would go into a trance and she would get information from somewhere out there, and they would be communicating with me through her. And so they would tell me that I had a role to play, that what I was doing was on the right path, and that I was to be a counselor and informer. And that really was what set me off into, I guess, being motivated to actually start writing something.
Okay. I love the conversation of meditation, especially in the way that we're talking, right? There's a lot of pop culture references which are not necessarily 100% accurate, right? With how meditation works, but there's also different forms of meditation.
True.
How quickly did you move along in your learning of meditation before you started to see a direct result in your life? Because sometimes, people, it's like weeks, months, days, but sometimes people are like, after that first one, they felt a difference dang near immediately. Some people talk about higher uh, cognitive abilities to focus better, think quicker, do better, just off of meditation, not to mention some of the other things that you had mentioned.
Yeah. Um, 2009 is when I started to really be disciplined about meditating. I would be doing 45 minutes a night. Um, and that was when I lived away from home. I lived in New Orleans. I would go there for 2 weeks, come back for a weekend, go there 2 weeks. And this was for 30 months, because I was working on a project to repair damage from Katrina.
Oh,
So um, that was, I think, where I started to really have the, you know, just, I guess I was refining my ability. I was improving the discipline, um, and the feeling of Kundalini, right? Um, I started to get that, um, not very long after I started to meditate, and it was very consistent, and it was that shiver up and down the spine. That's when I realized that I was doing it right. But the the real, I guess, I, impactful meditations that occurred to me happened in started in 2012,
okay.
when I was here in Winchester, Virginia, and that was where, prior to that, my mentor told me that, they told me through her that I was going to get tested, and that's all they said. I was going to get tested. Not long after that, in meditation, I went through a wormhole, and it was an amazing experience. It was color, light, motion, um, heart racing, perspiration, vibration, everything. And when I realized what was going on, um, I was back in my body. And then 2 years after that was when I had what I called the indigo cloud meditation. And that was where I was just, peaceful outside, and all of a sudden I see a indigo cloud before me, and I also feel a euphoria, which you you don't feel that kind of happiness here on Earth. You know, it's just something. It's like when people talk about and near-death experiences, and they have like a feeling of just peacefulness and stuff.
Yeah.
That's what it was. As the cloud dissipated in my meditation, I noticed all along the horizon there were flashes of indigo, and as I got closer, the the feeling of the euphoria got stronger. And then I got the message what the flashes were, and the flashes were our spirits, um, between lives, not our spirits, but spirits between lives, were either downloading their past life or uploading their next life. And all of those spirits are energies. And the energies combine into that one mass. It was like a um, beehive of activity, was what everyone calls God,
Yeah.
the source energy. And then when I got that information, I was back in my body again. So I use those two um, experiences, and I write about them in the book because it guides the plot.
Yeah. That's awesome. Tell us, our audience who heard you said the word Kundalini earlier. Explain to our audience what that means for the people that don't really know.
I don't really know enough to be an expert,
From your point of view, what
but
do you think it means? Maybe not from
I think
everyone's.
it is when you're in meditation and you reach a point where you're about to go into looking inward in your third eye,
Yeah.
but right before that, it's like a spark, a shiver from, and it starts from the back of your skull, and it goes down to the very end of your spinal cord, and then back up again. And I think it's essentially a message from the spiritual world that you're doing it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a validation, right?
I always
And
talk about it
it's
being like a snap
possibly
of a fingers, kind of, or a loud, like a clap of the hands, like this
it,
snap a
yeah,
moment. It's that moment in between.
and I think it probably is it's like a sign that your third eye is about to be activated or something like that too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I love it. I love it. It's a great topic. I could talk about that for hours with you, but you mentioned your book, The Disclosure
Hmm.
Paradox. Tell us a little bit about the main character of that book and kind of how it reflects on some of your experiences.
Yeah, well, the main character is based on me. All of the events that are in the book that are not um, action based um, are based on real events. Um, I guide the reader through the process that I went through by giving the story of um, the character's name is Louis Salvani, and the name Louis Silvani is my father's name transposed, where his name is Silvano Luigi.
Oh, okay.
So so I did that. Um, and so I guide the reader through the process of the spiritual evolution of the main character. Starts out as a UFO researcher. Well, I mean, the book starts out with he's a UFO researcher, but I go into his backstory of the time that the main character is in Catholic school, and there um, are incidents that guide him in the process of being skeptical, and there are things that happen, while he's in school, key things that kind of form his character. um, and then I explain what happened to me as being a high school student and then going into the Air Force. So that's all in there. And the but the other thing is that I also explain to the readers about going into the rabbit hole and that you can go too deep.
Right.
And I explain how the main character resisted going too deep, becoming one of those QAnon type of people,
Right.
where he was able to understand where to stop digging and where to get back to reality, and that's all um, through uh, events that happen, people that he's met. So it's also meant, to guide the reader on that. And the other part is that I put in like four key pieces of evidence that are real facts that point out that there is extraterrestrial activity on Earth: Antarctica, Alaska, Rendlesham Forest, and Dulce, New Mexico.
Okay.
And and so there is a chapter there that goes into all that, and that's because I have the main character as a UFO researcher, and he's about to present to an audience at a conference evidence of extraterrestrials on Earth. And those are the things that I write down.
What caught you to choose to do a fiction book, a fiction novel, rather than a like a biography or an autobiography or a nonfiction book on the topic? Why did you choose to fictionalize it?
First of all, if I just wrote what was nonfiction, it'd be rather boring.
Okay.
There's only a few things that happened to me, and then the rest is, my explanation. The second thing is that I'm not well known. I'm not like Richard Dolan or the guys that show up at Ancient Aliens or Von Daniken or Graham Hancock. I'm not like those people. I don't have a following like them. Can't compete in that kind of environment. But the other thing is that I wrote fiction because there are people that um, are turned off by nonfiction about that topic. They won't read that. They won't even pick it up
Right.
because their minds are certain that all of that is a hoax. So what I did is I wrote it in fiction to attract an audience that is attracted to to fiction, and to kind of open their minds by presenting all the things and in a way where they have to do their own research on whether what they're reading is fiction or nonfiction, because there's a lot of nonfiction in there. And I have heard from people that, oh wow, I went into the internet and I checked out that story that you had in there, and they said, my gosh, it's true. So it was to get people that would normally not read nonfiction to read this fiction and open up their minds to reading more nonfiction like that.
I also like the fact that you'll get a lot of stories, a lot of fiction stories, and they're too far. They're too, two Men in Black, like the movie Men in Black. They're that kind where it's like, it's either silly or it's like it's serious, but it's very overt. Like, oh yeah, and me and the aliens were having a conversation, and then they got in there, But yours is a lot more. It's a lot more real. It's a lot more like, oh, this is, somebody down the street could have experienced some of this stuff, and we would have never known. And that's what I like about the concept of it is it's like it's very real, even though it's fiction, but that's because it is very real, right?
Exactly. Um, one thing is that everything, all the places that I have in the book are real. What happens in those places is not. I have Edward Air Force Base. I have Groom Lake, Nevada. I have Mount Shasta. I have, um, you know, Dulce, New Mexico. All of those places are real. They exist, and you just need a little bit of a stretch of imagination to read that and think, wow, maybe that really could happen there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You've got a second book coming, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Can you tell us about it? You want to tell us about it just
Oh,
a little bit?
no, yeah. It's a sequel, and let me explain something.
Okay.
Um, you might like this. I originally wrote this, which is the Disclosure
The
Paradox, right?
Disclosure Paradox, yeah.
It was the first book, and I self-published, okay, in 2019.
Yes.
And then I wrote a sequel based on one of the characters in that book. Actually, I'm sorry, it's a prequel based on one of the characters of the book, which is based on a real person. And she allowed me to interview her, and we were doing a lot of just exchanging information, and she allowed me to fictionalize her
Okay.
in this prequel. So and that one was released in 2021. Now, not long after, a former Benedictine monk who was a researcher on the Shroud, still
Yeah.
is. He's been doing research for 40 years. He searched on the internet extraterrestrials and spirituality and found my first book, and he loved it. And he friended me, and then he said, "You know what's missing in this book is the
The
Shroud."
Shroud, yeah.
And, and I thought, okay. So he sent me about 300 PDFs of research papers, you know, not at the same time,
Right.
but one by one for months. He would send me a, 3 a day from researchers on the Shroud on all disciplines, botany, forensics, hematology, uh, archaeology, art, history, all of that. And I started reading it, and it authenticated the the fact that the Shroud is real to me. And I thought, wow, actually, this probably could be a good third book.
Right.
So I sent him an outline because I came up with an idea. I sent him an outline. He liked it. Then I sent him the forward, or not the forward, the manuscript. 6 months afterwards, I sent him a manuscript, and he liked it to the point where he's actually written the forward for that novel. Now, I didn't intend to write a third book because the first two didn't do too well, right?
Right.
But I did, and I wrote the manuscript, and with his forward, I thought maybe this has a chance to get someone to be interested in it. And sure enough, um, through again a chance meeting with an editor, um, he looked at my idea. He read the manuscript. He loved it. He had a publisher, and that's how I got the contract for all three books. Is because of that Benedictine monk. So yeah, that sequel will be coming out in October, and it is a conspiracy to steal the Shroud of Turin. It is a sequel because it's got characters that are common in the first book, except for the main character.
Okay.
Um, and it starts with a murder in the Vatican, and it goes from there. And what it does is there's an entire chapter that goes into all the disciplines about the Shroud through they're in a hotel lobby, and they're talking to scientists, and one by one the scientist explains why they say the Shroud is authentic. So that one chapter is just all that. and the the monk really liked that. Um, Former monk really liked that, and um, the one thing though that sets this book apart from other books is that the hypothesis is that the blood of Christ has certain powers and that the DNA is different. And in actuality, there is no human match for the blood of Christ, according to um, hematologists. And they're discovering that the DNA also differs from human DNA. So my hypothesis is that, and this is based on 376 verses in the New Testament that just mentions the blood of Christ. I don't think that's an accident.
No.
I don't think it's coincidence. I think there's something about that. And when they say that the blood of Christ will wash away the sins of the earth, I took that literally because I think we should take a lot of things in the Bible literally rather than metaphor. You start to look at things differently. And so, what if we were to have technology that we could harvest the DNA of Jesus and use it to repair our own DNA and
Mhm.
be like him?
Fascinating. Yeah. I'm looking forward to when that book comes out. And that's still coming out September, right? September 2025.
September, October.
Okay, so we're
Yeah.
around there. So people can keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, they can go and check out the other books as well. The other,
That's
yeah.
going to be called Salvation.
Okay. The
And
Disclosure Paradox Salvation.
yeah, I don't know if you can see that.
A little bit. Yeah, it's a little bookmark of salvation. And it's on your website as well. So people can go
Oh
to
yeah,
the
you can see the chat.
disclosureparadox.com and see the poster. And I
Yeah,
believe that the forward is on your website as well. The forward that was written
correct.
is on there if you look at the second book. So
Right.
can you tell us, we have it's on your website. It's coming out, you said, in around 2026, I believe, your other book, the What Doesn't Kill Her, which is completely different, right?
It is the prequel that that I told you about.
Oh, okay.
That was the second book.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's coming out in 2026.
Yes.
That's exciting. So people can check all of them out. So they're all connected. They're all interconnected. That's great.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. That one is about Katrina. Katrina is in the disclosure paradox. She has psychokinetic powers. She can see energy waves and manipulate them, like uh, like objects in the water could be seen by sonar.
Yeah.
She had that same ability. She was abducted as a child with her brother, and during that abduction, they put an implant behind her eye that gave her that ability. And when the CIA found out about it, and they realized that she was, like a loose cannon or
Yeah.
uncontrollable, uh, they abducted her. They put her under, and they took the implant out.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I can't wait to see those books come out. Read those. Hopefully, our audience really gets a bigger look into the world through your writings. So, do you have any upcoming events? Do you have any other podcasts, interviews, appearances,
Um,
autograph signings, any of that kind of stuff coming up?
I've got Okay, so I have a Facebook group that where I update people, and it's called Discussions About Disclosure Paradox,
Okay.
and it's open for anyone to join. I'm also on Blue Sky as PGV author, and my website. I try and update things there. Um, so that's pretty much it. I have like 3 podcasts a week,
So you're
and
all over the place.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
and I am working on a 4th book.
Fantastic. Set in the same world or separate?
It is it's in the series,
Okay. Okay.
and it will involve the Hadron Collider.
Oh, that's exciting. I every time I hear stuff about the collider, I go, oh, yep, that's something I'm interested in hearing about for sure.
Yeah. So the hypothesis is that, um, you know, as I mentioned in the first book, when we exploded the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was like a fire alarm throughout the universe because um, we did not know what we were doing,
Right,
and they saw us as children playing with matches. What we eventually learned was that the explosion, the immense amount of energy expended, not only affected our dimension, but it affected other dimensions, and that's why we had such a spike in UFO activity, and most of the activity that we had, even to this day, are centered around places where we store nuclear weapons, or there is, atomic energy going on somewhere, right?
right,
So, so my hypothesis about the Hadron Collider is that once they learned that through the use of that detonation, that they could break into a dimension, they thought maybe they could control that kind of energy release and break into a dimension intentionally.
right.
So that's what my premise is in that book. And
Which
of
is
course,
fascinating.
things
Every
get
time I hear
worse.
about the collider, my first thought is always the Mandela effect and the multiple universes and the multiple dimensions and the alternate realities and how it's affecting all of that. That's always my first thought. So when you saying, trying to break into the ultimate realities or other dimensions, I'm like, okay, okay. I'm very excited to see where that goes. I'm very excited. So,
The trouble is, I mean, I know the characters that I want in there, and I've started. I have a new character based on my cousin who is a brilliant person, and I kind of portray him as like a Oppenheimer, where his work is used for purposes that he didn't intend.
okay.
So I have that going on, and I have that struggle going on, but I don't have a plot, and I
Okay.
know what I want to do. So I'm kind of working sideways right now, and I
Yeah.
just like I'm telling you right now, I just started it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably not going to happen for another 3-4 years.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it. I appreciate you being here on the show. They can find you on Facebook, as you mentioned. You're on Instagram. I think I might have found you on Blue Sky. I don't know. I have to double check that again. But you're on social
Yeah,
media. People can find you on your website, thedisclosureparadox.com, correct?
correct. Exactly. All one word.
All one word. So, guys, you can all go and check that out. Of course, if you're in the live stream, stick around. We're going to be getting to some of your live stream questions in just a moment. So, feel free to throw those up in chat. Ask Paul some questions, and we will get to them in just a little bit. Of course, coming up on Epic Realms, we're going to be joined by Nathan Crowder on our next episode. He's an author and writer known for his superhero world of Cobalt City. He also writes scripts, mythos from Call of Cthulhu, and that kind of a universe, speculative fiction, and so much more. That's going to be live June 16th. The podcast will be available on the 17th. Also down the road, author and writer Jeff Grubb, Lenore Woods, Mike Selinker, so many more. So please rate, review, follow, push all of those buttons. It helps us and in turn helps our guest. For Paul, I am Nick, and I want to thank you guys all for listening to Epic Realms. Please make sure to go and get the Disclosure Paradox right now. Read it and get ready for the future books.